Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I want to talk about the RunCam Hybrid camera that I've been using in my quads here lately, and I want to talk about the pros, cons, and some tips on using it to get the best performance, at least as far as I know so far in my usage of it. So pretty good camera overall. I've been pretty happy with it, but there are some things that aren't so great, and there's some things that's pretty good, and then there's just some general tips that are good to know whenever you're using it. So I've got my notes here on my computer. I'm going to kind of go through these. So you see me looking over here a little bit. That'll be why. Anyways, so let's start off with some pros. It's got good image quality. It'll record in 4K. You don't have to have a GoPro. That's always a good thing. So you don't have to wait from the GoPro. You got one less camera to break. It's got two lenses. So I don't know if you know anything about the hybrid camera or the split style cameras from the past. Previously you would have one camera that would do your FPV feed and your recording, and while that seems like that might be cool, in practice it really wasn't. And the problem was that you had the same settings for your FPV feed as well as your camera, and then you also introduced latency because it had to go through, record, all that kind of stuff, so you have a little bit of latency there. So having the two cameras is really useful. It has a QR code for settings. That's a pro. That's also a con, because you can't really do the settings any other way. You have to use the QR codes, but it is really convenient. So you pull up your app, you've got all your settings, which is really nice. You don't have to go reset anything. It remembers everything that you had. And so like if you wanted to like tweak just your white balance, or you just wanted to tweak your shutter speed or something, and you want to make a quick change, you could do that. Point it at it, it changes it, and it'll remember that. And then the next time you just go back and change it again, which is that's pretty nice. I don't generally do that, but that's a pretty cool feature. It's also a negative because that's the only way that you can do it. You know, there's pros and cons there. So there's no battery to deal with, so you don't have to worry about having a battery charged. It'll do auto recording as soon as you plug the quad in if you want it to. I don't have mine set that way. We'll talk about that in a bit. You can control the recording with a switch. Again, I don't have that set up on mine. I just use the little button that's on it. But you can set up a switch on your transmitter and have it do recording stuff. You just got to solder another wire to your flight controller and do a little configuration like in Betaflight or something. But again, I'm not doing that. I don't really see a need to, but you know, it's a nice feature. Only one board. Some of the old split style cameras had two boards, so it's much easier to fit in a lot of different builds. It's a 20 by 20. A lot of frames now are supporting 20 by 20. This one doesn't, but I did get it in there. I've got an adapter board in there. This one's a 30 by 30 board holder. You know, it's the Martian 2. But I've got an adapter board in there. The downside of that is it raises it up a little bit more. So, you know, you got less space. But, you know, 20 by 20 board, a lot of frames are supporting that now, so that's a good thing. And it's pretty lightweight for the camera. Actually, having two cameras, 18 grams. So if you are used to carrying a GoPro, you know, over 100 grams, you know, you're dropping 100 grams of weight. You know, or even if you're doing the session, you're dropping like 55 grams of weight. So that's a pretty nice savings there. And you know, you've got, depending on how your frame is, you'll have more or less protection for it than you would for a GoPro in general. GoPros are pretty durable, although my luck here lately, which is why I've got this, has resulted in multiple ones that don't work. And so I kind of got tired of that. So anyways, that's your pros. Now the cons. So it has a small field of view, and this is probably my biggest con. It has 145 degree field of view for your HD feed. For your FPV feed, it's not too bad. It's 155, so really similar to the RunCam Phoenix. I think it's just a few degrees smaller, so really I can't tell any difference between it and my normal RunCam Phoenix. Maybe slightly, but it's not really enough to matter as far as that goes. But the HD feed, it's only 145 degrees, and that's the one that really kills me, because your GoPros are like 170. So, which makes a huge difference. It's kind of like recording on the GoPro in wide mode and not like super view. Is kind of what it's like. It's not terrible, but that's probably my biggest gripe. And you could fix that with a different lens. and this is a different con, is these lenses are not sizes that are more common. This is a 10, this is an 8. The 8 is a little more common, the 10 not so much. Hopefully RunCam will release some lenses with some different fields of view. That would be nice. RunCam, if you're listening, I would like to have a little bit wider field of view. Would be great. Maybe, you know, 160 would be nice. I could live with 160. That'd be great. There's no 4:3 recording option. So if you're like me and you like to take 4:3 footage and do your own super view with it, when you're not using a GoPro, you don't have a 4:3 option. So doing the typical trick of taking 4:3 footage and turning into super view doesn't really work. QR code, which I mentioned, you know, you can only set the settings with the QR code. That can be a positive or a minus. There's no battery. That's a positive. It's also a negative because your files have no timestamp, and they don't get a timestamp. They have invalid ones every single time. So if you're like me, I like to have, you know, that timestamp on there. So now what I have to do is I have to get the file. I have to kind of guess about when I kind of started and, you know, adjust the timestamps accordingly and make sure I save them that way, or just remember that's what it is. And that's kind of frustrating. I would really like to have the timestamp on there because I'm prone to not delete stuff off my SD cards for a while. And then when I'm looking at them, I like to be able to go back and remember when they were. And you can't, so you have to kind of adjust for how you're doing that. Let's see here. Along with the battery, it requires more than an amp, according to the documentation, half an amp to more than an amp of power. So they don't recommend that you power it from your VTX because most VTXs don't have a strong enough BEC to power it. So you're like, okay, no problem. It takes up to, you know, 24, 30 volts. I don't remember. It's a lot. I was like, oh, I'll just hook it to my battery. Nah, nope, they don't recommend plugging into your battery either. So what are you going to do? That's kind of a problem. I did run it off of battery power for a while, and I really didn't have any issues, though there was more noise in the footage. But I didn't have any problems with doing that. I'm not doing that anymore. The VTX that I use actually has like a 2 amp BEC. This is the TBS Unify Pro 32 HV. So if you're looking for a VTX for it, I highly recommend that VTX. I recommend that VTX anyways. Great VTX. I've not had any issues with it. And my clock's going off. And that concludes your musical interlude. All right, so that's what I would recommend is the Unify Pro 32. It's got a really good BEC over 2 amps, so you can easily power it and you get nice clean video there. So a couple other options. There's no couple other cons. There's no ND filters that are available currently. Somebody may come up with those in the future, but currently there's not. I suppose you could cut some, you know, window tint and put on there, although it is a curved surface, so that's always a little tricky to put on. But no ND filters. There's limited shutter options, so there's like 1/30th, 1/50th, 1/60th, 1/100th, maybe 1/25th also, I can't remember. But there's like no 1/120th. There's, you know, no 1/240th, which would be good if you want to follow the typical rule where your shutter speed is twice your frame rate. And if you were using ND filters, so you really can't do that. So that's a problem. There's, speaking of FPS, there's limited on that. You've got 30, 50, and 60. You may think, well, that's fine, or 25, 30, 50, and 60. You're like, that's fine, except that it's limited on certain resolutions. So 1080p, you can get 30 and 60 and 25 and 50. You can get all those, even 120. You go to 2.7K, you've got 60 or 50. And if you go to 4K, you only have 30. So those may suit you, and if they do, great. If they don't, be aware that's what you're limited to. I generally record in 1080p 60, and then I export in 4K 30, so I'm upscaling. I do that mainly because I like to have as much data coming in as far as the recording frame rate. And you may think, well, why not do 2.7 60? Well, my computer's kind of slow, and that takes up extra space. So, and I only put it on YouTube, and so YouTube butchers it anyways, and most people aren't watching it in really high res on their big TVs or anything, and the few that do, it's not going to really matter all that much when you got fast motion. It's not really going to make that big of a difference. So that's what I do. And the last one is there's no kind of stabilization. Now, there is that app that came out here recently that the guy has called GyroFlow. So if you've got black box recording, I don't, but if you have black box recording on your quads, then you can record your black box log, and then you can use GyroFlow, and you could use the output from this, and you could do your image stabilization. But there's nothing built in, so nothing like HyperFlow. There's not even electronic image stabilization. Not that those ever worked very well with RunCam anyway, so it's not like it's a big loss, but that's just something to keep in mind. So that's my pros, that's my cons. Let me give you a few tips now. So the first and most important tip that I can give you is hard mount it. As you can see, I've got this mounted directly to the frame, hard mount that way. When I first tried it, I was using the little soft mount TPU legs. I don't have one handy, but the little ones that mount on these right here, and they kind of go back, and they've got the little hole, and you run your screw through it and mount your camera in there. Those work great for typical cameras, and I thought they would work great for this, and they sort of worked. I had two different sets. I had one that was a little softer TPU and one that was a little harder TPU. And what I found was the softer TPU one gave me horrendous results. I had so much gel on my footage. I was so disappointed. I was like, oh man, this isn't going to work. And the other one, though, was fine. And so I thought maybe I had a problem with my quad. And so I went through 3 different FCs, 4 different firmwares, probably a couple weeks of tuning and stuff, and I would get it better and it would get worse, and sometimes it would get better and sometimes it would get worse. And I was having a conversation with my buddy Florada, and we were talking about it, and he was telling me some things maybe to try, and then it just dawned on me, maybe I should just hard mount this. He was like, yeah, why don't you try that? And so I tried that, and that fixed my problem. So hard mount it. And if you're going to use TPU, make sure it's just like as a shim, and it's not supporting it directly. You want something that's solid supporting it. Seems kind of weird, but that is what I have found. Next big tip, make sure that you format your SD card using the camera. There's an option in the QR codes to do a format. Do it that way. Better still, use a card with the right brand that RunCam recommends. They recommend Samsung. And so I have some that aren't Samsung, that were SanDisk, that gave me all kinds of problems initially until I formatted them using the camera itself. And when I formatted them with the camera itself, those problems went away. But I also ordered some Samsung ones that were larger and put those in. I didn't do any formatting, didn't do anything. I just plugged them right in, and they work perfectly. The problem that you run into is it will just randomly stop recording. Sometimes it'll record the whole flight, sometimes it won't. Most of the time, it'll cut off somewhere in the middle. And it's got the little blinky thing on your OSD that'll show that it's recording, so you'll know when it stops, but you can't get it going again. If you've got a switch, I guess you could make it, you could do a stop start and make it start again, but you're gonna lose some stuff. So format it using the camera itself. I don't know why, but it makes a difference. Let's see here, and make sure they are the U3 cards. So that's good to make sure they're fast enough to record. And all mine were U3, and I still had the problem. And it didn't matter what the resolution was. I even dropped it down to 1080 30, and I still had the exact same problem. So it wasn't the data rate. It's something about the formatting. I don't know what it does to it differently inside the camera versus using the SD card formatter, you know, directly from, you know, the group that put out the SD formats, you know, still didn't matter. So format using the camera and use the Samsung cards. And let's see here, the one last tip, and then I want to talk about the settings that I use. The last tip that I have, let me get one of the cameras there so I can show you, is to cover the mic on it because the audio is terrible. So if you don't care about audio, it won't matter. If you want to have a little bit of your motor noise and stuff and not have the awful sounding, that awful sound that you normally get with RunCams, I'm going to cover the mic. I'm going to show you where that's at on here. Let's see if I can get kind of focused. Anyways, it's this little, get that over there. It's that little gold piece there beside of the card reader. Right there, you'll see it's got a little tiny hole in it, kind of like a barometer. Cover that over, and you can do it with tape. I found that didn't work all that well. It helped a little, but not all that much. But what I found worked really, really, really well is either E6000, or in my case, I used shoe goo. Just take a little bit of it, cover it over, fixes the problem. So that is my tips. Let me give you my settings that I use on the camera, you know, for what it's worth for recording. And then I'll leave you guys with a little flying here. So I set the volume on low. I set the ISO to auto. I set my shutter to a fixed 1/30th. I set the video quality to high. I set my resolution to 1080p 60, which I mentioned earlier. Date stamp turned off. I don't know why you would have date stamp, because it's invalid and there's no way to set it or anything as far as I can tell. If I'm wrong on that and somebody knows better, please correct me. I would love to have valid timestamps, but I don't want them in the video. But I would like to have them as part of the file metadata. Saturation I have turned all the way down to 1. Exposure comp I have set at 0. The contrast I have set to 1, which is the lowest setting. Sharpness I have set to 1, which is the lowest setting. Metering I have set to average. White balance I leave mine fixed at sunny. That's basically 5500 Kelvin. That's what I used to use with my GoPros, and I never changed it. There is a low light compensation setting. I have that turned off, and that's basically all my settings. Like I said, that's what I'm doing. I'll leave you guys with a little bit of footage. Hopefully these tips, pros, cons, help you make a decision if you want to get one of these, and if you do, you know what to expect whenever you get it. Overall, pretty happy with it. It is not a GoPro. It does not have the same quality as a GoPro. If you are doing professional shooting, this is not sufficient for doing professional shooting. I would not recommend it. I would recommend a GoPro, or an even better camera if you're really doing professional stuff. But for sharing your footage and just making some nice flight edits and stuff, more than adequate. Just bear in mind the limited field of view. So great for like chasing type stuff. Not so great if you're doing a lot of really crazy acrobatics. It's probably going to look a little weird depending on, you know, just keep that in mind. It's a limited field of view. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. You guys have a great day. Enjoy this flight edit. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.